Well, good morning. Here we are, Judy and I. We are currently in quarantine because I've just returned, well, almost 2 weeks ago now, returned from the UK, where I saw my dad, 98, and who's approaching end of life, and my mum and two sisters. So we're in quarantine. That's tied in with COVID, obviously. I'm going to say a little bit about COVID towards the end of this time together. But
We're having the time of our lives.
yes, it's especially nice when it's sunny outside like it is now. But I have to say I've got very good company during this time of quarantine together. So we're going to be looking at Psalm 136. And I'm going to ask you if you will read it shortly, but I'm just going to say a tiny bit about it ahead of time. It seems to me to be a psalm that is the clash of faithfulness and unfaithfulness. A faithful God and people who, first reading, or maybe, a first reading, you might not see this, but this is a psalm that's tied in with Passover. It's read at Passover. You know, some commentators think that that's why it was written. It was thinking about Passover. But it's a people who are in dire straits, out of their own making, in captivity, with enemies, but God and his faithfulness. So it's the meeting of faithfulness and unfaithfulness. And the psalmist leads us to a place of giving thanks and being just full of rejoicing about who God is and his great faithfulness. So as you read it, it's a psalm that when I come to it, I have to intentionally stop myself to read at a pace that is appropriate, not just racing forward thinking, oh, I know this line, because you'll notice if you haven't read it already that there is a line that is repeated.
Spoiler alert.
Every single verse. And it's easy to think, oh, I know, and just skip that and skip that entirely. But that's the point of the psalm of understanding, recognizing, and holding on to the truth that God is faithful. His loving kindness, his covenant love endures forever. It's everlasting towards us. But then also reading at a pace where we can keep hold of the progression of the things that the psalmist writes about in between those lines, and to see the progression of talking about God in his creative person of who he is as God, and then in creation, and then his deliverance, his inheritance, those things. So we're going to pause. I've said most of this stuff. Judy's going to talk in a minute, but we're going to pause, and I suggest read this psalm, Psalm 136. It's a great psalm. Okay, we have paused, and now, Judy, are you going to share? Yeah, you are.
Sure.
You're going to share a little
bit. I have to say this psalm can be a little irritating to read. That line, for his loving kindness or his covenant love, his faithfulness, his mercy, is everlasting, can feel like an interruption. But it's not the interruption, it's the main message. I felt like God said to me while Charlie was away, one of the things he said one day while I was journaling was, if you don't know my heart for you, you will be overwhelmed by this. And the this I had been struggling with was guilt over my sense of faithlessness on my part, looking for satisfaction in things, wasting my time. It's been like this dark cloud hovering over me, and just thoughts of debt that I owed to him, to others, and the enemy saying, you are so disqualified. You should just shut up. You don't measure up. You have nothing to say. But God's heart is not duties, deeds, tasks. These are good things, but I felt like God said, if you don't know my heart for you in these things, you will be overwhelmed. So rather, knowing his heart, I remember coming downstairs in my late 20s in the middle of the night, just feeling heavy, hungry, and I felt like God said to me, I have loved you with an everlasting love. And I have never forgotten that. Just this sense that his faithfulness is greater than my debt, my faithlessness, my guilt, and that these very things, the duties, the deeds, the tasks, rather become desires and delights and treasures. Vernon has, I'm just going to say, cut in and say, Vernon has amazing views. We're sitting looking at our view. It's incredible. I've been in quiet little back gardens where you don't expect it, but they have this amazing vista of mountains and lakes. The vista I had forgotten about was this, just simply cherishing Jesus. And then the duties become desires, and the deeds become delights, and the tasks become treasures. John Piper wrote, Christ is to be cherished, not just chosen. And so that irritating little line that is repeated over and over is actually the main thing. The circumstances, the dire straits we find ourselves in are temporal. It's a feisty sort of psalm.
It is.
Charlie was saying to me this morning, it's a feisty psalm, especially in the face of guilt. I'm just going to end with one last quote from John Piper. I've been reading one of his books this week. Saying, I want to be happy is Christian shorthand for, I want to know the one who is in himself all I have ever longed for.
I might get Judy to repeat that quote at the end, because I think it sums up so much. And I think this is what Judy shared of this sense of guilt and unfaithfulness, that debt. Talking with people during these very strange times of COVID, it does seem to be a common theme of just feeling somehow out of sorts, in debt of, am I doing everything I should be doing? All of those sorts of things. And debt, I think, is a great word. I think of Matthew's writing of Jesus teaching about how to pray. Forgive us our debts.
Yeah.
If we're feeling in debt, we need to go to God to say, please forgive me my debts. Not just to God, but to everyone. Please forgive me as I have forgiven others. We need to forgive others, but we need to come to God. If you feel in debt, come to God and say, I feel so in debt, and the truth is I am in debt. But please cross out those debts. Next week and the following weeks, we're going to be looking at the book of Colossians, and some of you will have recognized that was a bit of a poor quote from Colossians, but it says, Paul writes in the Paul writes in the book of Colossians, or the letter to Colossians, that our certificate of debt against us has been nailed to the cross, and Christ has cancelled out those debts. So be debt free. Anyway, Psalm 136. I'm going to say a few things, just a few points from the psalm. It really is sort of a thumbnail sketch, or a sort of join the dots sort of sketch, because our heart in these YouTube videos is that you, in your families, in little groups, go to God yourself to say, Lord, what are you showing me here about yourself, about me, what I need to change? And then who can I tell this good news to? So this is not an in-depth, exhaustive study. But first off, give thanks. That's how the psalmist begins, and it's how he ends. The purpose of this psalm is that it should remind us and reinvigorate within us our gratitude and thanks to an awesome God. Why? His loving kindness is everlasting. Like Judy said, of coming downstairs that time and just this sense of God saying, I have loved you with an everlasting love. That could be taken from this psalm. It isn't. Those aren't quite the words here, but that's what the psalmist is trying to get through to us is God loves us with an everlasting love. He loves us actively, faithfully, forever, despite everything and despite ourselves. And then again, the context of this psalm is remembering. And there are certain things that the psalmist takes time to remember and to remind us, his readers, truths. Remembering that God is God. He is the Lord of Lords, the God of gods. He's the God of heaven. He is God. Our God is God. Think about that. He's God. No one above him. No one greater than him. No one who can dethrone him. No one who can overrule him. He's our God. And then to remember creation. The God of creation. He's the God of creation. The enormity of all that's out there, he created. The power involved in creation and the power that's evident in the creation and the beauty of creation, not just the beauty of my wife, but the beauty of creation, the green, the gold, the sunsets, the sunrises, the beautiful vistas, and the provision of creation. He provides food for all flesh. He provides for you and I body, soul, and spirit. And deliverance. He is the God who delivers. He delivers us from our enemies. He delivers us from our imprisonment. And he delivers us from the imprisonment of our own making. Maybe an imprisonment that we deserve. But he has come to wreck and turn over those things that we might deserve and instead lead us into his kingdom, his inheritance. Remember these things. And that word inheritance I use because I'm going to pick it up later, but also it's here. He's given us an inheritance. Not just physical land here, but an eternal inheritance in him. Think of these things and the provision that he supplies to us. He gives us our daily bread. Please, Lord, give us our daily bread. Wonderful. I could digress on that, but I'm not going to. And then in conclusion, what does the psalmist say? He says, give thanks. That's what this psalm is all about. Well, that's all I'm going to say really from Psalm 136. But I do want to say something about COVID. Going to the UK, and trying to figure out how to mesh the UK restrictions and the Canadian restrictions and requirements, I found time consuming. In retrospect, in some ways you could say it's fairly straightforward, but it took me a lot of time to figure it out and to act responsibly within those restrictions. So I want to say something about COVID and these times we're on. It's been over a year now. And in some ways, in fact, I was about to say in some ways it's become easier. And I was going to say in some ways it's become more difficult. But actually, I think, period, it has become more difficult. There seems to be a greater heaviness about it. The tensions around COVID are greater, I think, than they ever have been. Physically, when we look at some of the nations that are struggling with, again, the overflow in hospitals, not just of elderly people, but people in their 20s and 30s dying with COVID. And then, there's so much, and I don't want to get into it, but the context of me thinking about this and what I want to say is I came to Canada to come to Bible school in 1984 from the UK. And what struck me immediately was that this nation was different. I can remember my very first drive from the airport to where I was going to be living for the next year, and just being aware that the lines in the middle of the road were yellow. In England, they're white. It just was different. It was roads are roads, they're the same, but it was different. Even just so many things were different. Some things were the same. I noticed the stars at night looked very similar to how they appeared in England, and there were a few other things that were similar. But I was aware overall of the sense that there's something significantly different about Canada from England. And I prayed about it. I asked the Lord. It seemed of significance. And I felt very clearly that the Lord said to me, or highlighted to me, this difference, that back then, Canada and Canadians were people who were far more aware, or the people that I met were far more aware of their responsibilities than of their rights, compared to the UK. That in the UK, there just seemed to be so much more awareness of my rights and have I got them? Am I getting my rights? Am I getting what is due to me? Whereas here, there was just an awareness of responsibilities. And I saw it in many, many ways. I think the one way that really stood out was just the number of parents that I met who were involved in coaching their kids' baseball, actually not so much soccer back then, but baseball or hockey or football, and the involvement in community, and not just one parent, but many parents, people embracing responsibility. It does seem to me that Canada has changed. There is far more emphasis these days on what are my rights. And I noticed this in the context of COVID. I was talking about this with a pastor here in town. He said, well, it's interesting. When did you come? 1984, 85? Well, it's interesting. In 1982, that's when the Charter of Rights became part of the Canadian Constitution. When I talk of my constitution, I'm talking about my metabolism, how I tick inside, what's working my makeup. And it's become part of the Canadians' constitution to have this charter of rights, my rights. Of course, before that, there was the Bill of Rights in 1960, well before some of you were born, as was the Charter of Rights coming in 1982, but something began then, I think, that has changed the sort of general feeling in this nation where we're far more aware of our rights. And I want to say, sadly, listening to some Christians, seeing on YouTube and posts that I see where the sort of language and the vehemence of language that is used about we need to stand up for our rights, we need our rights. In the Old Testament, I can't remember the exact number, but there are thousands of laws. Only 2 of them are about rights. The rest of them in their entirety are about our responsibilities to keep those laws. The 2, interestingly enough, the 2 that are about rights are to do with inheritance. In Numbers 27, you could read where the daughters of, and I've got to read this because how do you pronounce this name? The daughters of Zelophehad came to Moses. They had no brothers, their father died, and their inheritance, or the land, everything belonging to the father, was going to be taken from them. And they said, surely, I can't remember the words, but they basically said to Moses, what about us women? What about us inheriting? And Moses went to the Lord and came back and said, yes, we're going to put it in the law from now on, from the Lord, that women can inherit. And then the other right is the right of the firstborn to a double inheritance. And don't misunderstand it. It's not that the firstborn has a double inheritance because I'm the firstborn, I'm the king, I'm the big person, and I have more so that I can enjoy myself more and do more. No, he received a double inheritance because now he was going to be responsible for the whole family. Yes, other people inherited, but if there were shortfalls or anything, the firstborn now had responsibility for the whole family. And these rights are tied with responsibilities. And it just seems, actually, before I get on to that, think as well in the New Covenant, the New Testament. Those who receive Jesus are given the right to become children of God, part of his kingdom, sharing in the inheritance of the saints, the inheritance of Jesus, an inheritance that is absolutely loaded with responsibility to keep all Jesus' commandments. It seems that when we hold on to the rights of the kingdoms of this world, my hands can only hold so much. I need to hold on to the rights of the kingdom of God, that I become part of his family forever, loaded with responsibilities that he enables me to keep. And somehow we're not designed to hold on to the rights of the kingdoms of this world and the rights of the kingdom of heaven. I think we are designed to hold on to the responsibility of bringing the kingdom of heaven into the kingdoms of this world. And so it grieves me when I hear, there's a way of saying, I would love to be meeting together with my brothers and sisters in Christ. I would love for that. I miss them. There's a way of expressing desire that I think is the absolute extension and expression of the heart of God. But there's a way of expressing my rights that is far removed from the heart of God. And I think this psalm gives a context of people who are aware and remember their dire straits and rejoice in his faithfulness, and who give themselves freshly to hold fast to the rights and responsibilities of God's kingdom. Read the psalm again. What do we learn about God? What do we learn about ourselves? What do we need to change? How do we need to respond? And who can we share this good news to? I'm going to ask Judy to pray for us in closing. If there's any, why don't you?
No, let me just pray. Yeah.
Yes, pray.
Father, we just delight in the way you so want us to know that your loving kindness is everlasting,
Yes,
your covenant love for us. Lord, we want to be a people who cherish Jesus, who delight and treasure him, and what he's called us to, the responsibilities he's given us, because we are rightful members of his family, of his kingdom. So Jesus, we commit ourselves afresh to walking as your rightful children, carrying the responsibilities you give us, but you also enable us to carry out. So Lord, I thank you for VCF. I thank you for our family. Lord, we treasure one another. And Jesus, we treasure you above all. Thank you for being with us this morning. Amen.
Amen. It's great to be with you. Next week, Landon and I will be starting off our sermon series on Colossians, but let's not rush ahead to that. Let's stay in this psalm for a little while and learn. Amen. See you next time.